we live and move and have our story. In love, God lives in us and makes us whole. Oh, Jesus, may we hear the word that calls us near. Your story makes a home within our soul. Your story makes a home within our soul.
Welcome to StoryFest. Yeah, well, I hang out with a lot of clergy, and part of the reason is that I'm married to one. Bev, my spouse and lover of 60 years, is clergy. And working with clergy has been my job for 60 years. So because of that, I've heard many stories, good stories and terrible stories. Bev and other clergy have told me that so often it's when people are in grief, in pain, when someone has died or something terrible has happened to them, it's then that they have a spiritual experience. And I've heard this from many other people too, that it was when they were hurting most deeply, they experienced the presence of God. That's been my personal experience too, several times. I think that's why I've always been so deeply moved by the story of Mary of Magdala's visit to the tomb after Jesus had been brutally and horribly murdered. So that's the story we want to tell in this episode of StoryFest. For me, it's the central moment in the whole Jesus story when Mary sees the risen Christ through the prism of her tears. So let's begin by listening as Linnea tells us the story from the Bible.
Early in the morning, the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb and saw that the stone had been rolled away from the tomb. So she ran to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one that Jesus loved, and she said to them, "They've taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we don't know where they have laid him." So Simon Peter and the other disciple set out and went toward the tomb. Now they were running together, but the other disciple outran Simon Peter and got to the tomb first. He bent and looked in the tomb, and there he saw the wrapping linens there. But he didn't go in. Simon Peter came up behind him, following him, and he went right in the tomb. He saw the linen wrappings there, and the cloth that had been around Jesus' head, but not with the linen wrappings, rolled up and put in a place by itself. Then the other disciple came in, the one who had outrun him, and he saw, and he believed. For as yet they didn't understand the scripture that he would rise from the dead. Then they went to their homes. But Mary Magdalene stayed weeping outside the tomb. And as she wept, she bent over and she looked in the tomb. And there she saw two angels dressed in white, sitting in the place where the body of Jesus had been lying, one at his head and one at his feet. They said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping?" She said, "They've taken away my Lord, and I don't know where they've laid him." When she had said this, she turned around, and she saw Jesus, but she didn't know it was Jesus. He said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping?" She said, supposing him to be the gardener, "Sir, if you have carried him away, just tell me where you have laid him, and I will take him." He said to her, "Mary." She said to him in Hebrew, "Rabboni," which means teacher. He said, "Don't touch me, for I've not yet ascended to my Abba, my God. But go tell my sisters and my brothers that I am ascending to my Abba and your Abba, to my God and your God." So Mary went, and she announced to the disciples, "I have seen the Lord." And she told them that he had told her these things.
The story Linnea just told us often isn't given much attention at our Easter celebrations, and I wonder why. Happily, on our StoryFest team, we have Donald Schmidt. Donald is our color commentator, and he helps us understand the problem. Why is that?
When I was a kid, we used to say, "Sticks and stones may break my bones, but names can never hurt me." Right? I was so intrigued when my kids were in school and they came home, they'd learned this, and they said, "Yeah, sticks and stones can break my bones and names can really hurt me." I thought, wow, interesting change. And of course, they were right. We were wrong. Because we want to be brave, right, and say, "Oh, when people call me things, it doesn't matter," but it does. Makes a huge difference. If you don't believe me, read the newspaper. And so often, and lots of politicians do this, I'm not picking on anybody, but they will cut someone else down by calling them something. And we tend to hear that over and over. We being the Christian church, we did that with Mary Magdalene. You see, they didn't like the story that we just heard a few moments ago that Linnea shared. The problem that the early church had with that story, well, not the early church, the slightly after early church, problem that they had with that story is people believed it. People took that story very seriously, and that story said that Mary Magdalene, who was, by the way, a woman, was the first person that the risen Christ told to go and proclaim the news that Christ was risen. And so a lot of people really took that seriously and really celebrated the ministry that Mary had. And for the church that was dominated by men, that became a problem. Big problem. So amongst other things, we turned Mary Magdalene into a prostitute. You can read your entire Bible, and you will never find in there anything that even remotely implies that about her. Nothing. But the church said, "Oh yeah, it's in there, trust us." And she, did some nice things, but she really was, one of those sorts of girls. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink. And let's try and discredit her, and let's put her down. Because this story of all the Easter stories is just a little too powerful, a little too amazing, a little too real for us to let it go on unchecked. What a tragedy. What a tragedy.
Well, as I've said many times, when I want to understand a story, I mean really understand it, to allow it to get inside me, I retell the story. I try to visualize the events in my own head, and then I fashion my own story around it. So here's my retelling of the story of Mary of Magdala and when she goes to the tomb of Jesus. And it's told by our Reader's Theater.
Mary stumbled and fell in the dark. Her hand and elbow scraped against the ugly rocks, and though she couldn't see it, she knew she was bleeding. No matter, she had bled before. On she stumbled through the clutching darkness, along a half-remembered path. She felt her way to the garden tomb. Gradually, the cold, gray light of dawn outlined the naked rock that should have sealed the tomb, the place where they had buried her best friend. The reality, the horror hit her instantly. Even in his death, they could not give him some peace. This kind and gentle friend had died the cruel death of criminals, and now to add to all the horror, all the insult, someone had stolen Jesus' body. Screaming, she crashed back down the path, back to the house where she'd been mourning Jesus' death since that horror-filled Friday.
Peter! They've taken him away! Damn them anyway! They couldn't let him rest.
Peter, they've stolen Jesus' body. Oh my God, how can people be so brutal?
Now, again, with Peter, she scrabbled up the path toward the tomb. Her rage carried her now. Her unfocused anger at this outrage carried her through the bitter darkness up the broken path. Rocks and bushes scratched and tore her skin until she stood chest heaving beside Peter at the open tomb. Then she and Peter forced themselves to believe the unbelievable.
He's gone, Mary. All they left us was a corpse. And now they've got that too.
And Peter stumbled off, going nowhere but away from this revolting desecration. Mary stayed. She had nowhere to go. She had nothing left. The power of her rage was spent. She was exhausted. She slumped her almost lifeless body on a rock. Head in hands, she sat, her mind shut down. She felt nothing, not even the will to die. Then memories. Memories of terror, memories of despair, the pain of life in hometown Magdala came back with all its horrors. The darkness of that other life in that small town where she was beaten, starved, and raped, where people called her a slut and a whore, even though she was neither. Where she was called possessed of 7 demons, they said. It wasn't till she remembered overhearing rumors of a healer just down the lakeside at Capernaum that a sense of feeling returned, and with the feeling, tears. Tears that slowly washed her dry, red, angry eyes. Tears that moved to moans and then into body-heaving sobs, then great gasping, screaming cries that found their way from the bottom of her wounded soul.
Why, God? Why?
Through the prism of her tears, she saw the light of dawn slanting through the rocks into the garden. And there in that golden light, a figure, a man, it could be any man, it must be the gardener. Who else would be there so early in this place in the morning?
Look, if you took his body, just tell me, please, just tell me where so I can go and get him and give him a decent human burial. Please tell me, for God's sake, tell me. Mary.
The voice seemed to come from another world. It took some moments to move its way through her sobs and into her consciousness. She heard the voice a second time.
Mary.
Through her tears, through her salted tears of pain and anger and rejection, Mary saw him.
Rabbi!
Springing to her feet to embrace him, the light of morning sparkling through her tears, Mary rushed toward her Jesus.
Please, don't touch me, Mary. There are reasons. But don't be afraid. Go and tell our friends that death has been transformed to life, that despair has turned to hope.
This time the path unrolled beneath her dancing feet. This time the amber rocks and greening bushes sparkled in the morning light. This time she shouted hope to all her friends.
Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. I've seen him, it's true. What if everything he said is true?
Well, I'm a storyteller. That's who I am. That's what I do. So I get inside a deeply emotional story such as this one about Mary of Magdala by making up another story. The one you just heard from the Reader's Theatre is just one example of what I do. But there are other ways to let the story into our own lives. Different people do it in different ways. You know, you've heard the expression, different strokes for different folks. Well, Don McNair is an artist, and he worked his own way into the story by drawing this powerful picture.
In the picture of Mary of Magdala, one of the commentators made the observation that in the story, the readers find out something that she doesn't know yet. She doesn't know that the character is Jesus. And we have the satisfaction of realizing what's going to happen next before she does. So I've tried to draw a picture in which she is in that state of despair, a piece of human wreckage in the garden, and the shadow of somebody nearby is cast across her, so that without the words, we know that momentarily she will be transported by joy.
We have two Donalds involved in the StoryFest. There's Don McNair, the artist, and he prefers to be called Don. And then there's Donald Schmidt, our biblical commentator, who likes the full name, so we call him Donald. Well, the artistic and emotional portrayal of Mary of Magdala that Don gave us resonated very deeply with Donald.
It's so amazing to look at that image of Mary Magdalene. I'm used to images of Mary running from the tomb full of joy. But I have had those moments. I've had those times of lying there feeling like nobody cares. I've had those times when I think nobody likes me. Nobody cares. People are mean. People are horrible. This has happened. That has happened. This has come crashing in on me. I've even had times when people have said to me, you don't really have a right to have faith in Jesus, You don't really have the right to be part of the church, You don't really have the right to be a preacher, Some horrible, horrible times. But one day it dawned on me that even in those times, even in those most horrific moments, when I felt just like that, I heard Jesus say, my name. My name. And nothing else mattered. Because Jesus spoke to me. And now when I have those times, I remember that. And over and against everything else that the world has got, I have the most powerful thing ever. Because I have Jesus calling me by name.
So Donald has just taken a moment to say a bit about where he personally connects to this story that we're engaging this morning. And he's described powerful moments of connecting to that moment. That's just one moment in this huge and tender and beautiful story. You have a chance now in your small group to name where you connect. Where's the place where your story intersects with this story? Take a moment to wander into that with your words and your thinking, and think concretely. In this story, we have Mary in a place at the tomb. Where is that for you? Are you in the grocery store and you have some sort of interaction? Are you eating your cereal one morning and something happens? Locate this story in time and space. Where does your story and this story intersect?
So this might be a good time for you to stop the video. If you're by yourself, take a few moments to think deeply. I like to close my eyes to do this, to think deeply about just what I've seen and heard. And if you're fortunate enough to be watching this with a group of friends, well then, take as long as you need to share whatever you have to offer, whatever on your mind or your soul or in your belly. And it's quite okay to just sit there in silence, too. Sometimes surprising and fun things pop up at these StoryFests. Donald begins to share a poem that he wrote about Mary of Magdala, and he got himself sidetracked by a delightful memory.
One of the things I loved about serving in the United Church of Christ in the U.S. is in their hymnal they do this wonderful thing of putting a couple of lines at the bottom of each hymn explaining where the hymn came from, or a little bit about it, and it helped redeem a hymn for me that I used to despise and now I absolutely love. And that's a good thing because it's one of the most popular of all hymns in the U.S., and that's the hymn In the Garden. And I used to just find it strange until I realized that it was written as if it was the words of Mary Magdalene on that first Easter morning in the garden. And so as I say, it kind of redeemed the hymn for me, and I came to really appreciate the feelings and the thoughts that were in that. This story, as I shared before, has always meant a great deal to me. And several years ago, I wrote a poem of Mary Magdalene speaking years later about the experience and some of what it meant to her and to others. And Allison's going to share that.
Thanks, but before that, how does that hymn go?
I come to the garden alone, while the dew is still on the roses, and the voice I hear calling on my ear, the Son of God discloses. And he walks with me, and he talks with me, and tells me I am his own. And the joy I share we tarry there, none ever has ever known.
You've called me a whore from the very beginning and for 2,000 years. And Eve before me, a whore, a witch, and worse. Never bothered to get to know me. Never wanted to ask me, why are you alone? Who are you really? What's your story? How are you feeling? The other disciples, from the 12 through countless thousands, have discredited me, discredited us, called me a liar, a troublemaker, a disruptor, a nuisance, and worse. I frustrate you. I confound you. For 2,000 years, some of you have quietly or not so quietly wished I would go away. When the others turned and fled from the cross and the tomb, did you think I would flee too? Did you think I would give up? How could I? My life was too entangled with his. And no, I won't satisfy your idle curiosity about this relationship. No details. Except to say that had you not been so afraid of me, you might have learned a little more about not only me, but the other disciples who ministered along with Jesus, all the women, and the children, and the also-rans. But all that aside, I never could have left. I never could have fled. Despite all that I endured for 3 days, for 2,000 years, for 3 days, for 2,000 years, I have to stay. And in the silence, in the waiting, Christ came. And in the silence, and in the waiting, Christ came. And louder than all the scorn and the ridicule and the fear and the hatred, and louder than all the lies and the mistrust and the misunderstandings, Christ spoke my name. Mary. And I experienced resurrection. It's that same Christ who commissioned me to go and tell. So I'm here. I won't go away. As long as anyone anywhere is rejected or cast down or spat upon by the world, or even worse, by the church, I'm here to proclaim the truth once told to me. Christ Jesus is risen for you and calls you by name. And let no one ever tell you otherwise.
I was came to this church in 1969 with my husband, who was a minister of this congregation. And in 1974, due to certain circumstances, we separated and divorced. And I was really very involved in the congregation. We had an early service, and I was very involved in that early service. And then when the new minister came, it was as if I had not been here and I was forgotten. And I happened to miss a couple of Sundays because of moving and that kind of thing with my children. And nobody phoned to see if I was okay. Nobody called to see what was wrong. And the longer that they didn't call, the longer I stayed away. And I felt that, okay, I can get along very well without you. There's that song. But I never lost my faith. I became very involved in the community and used my faith in the community rather than here.
In fact, you were elected as Woman of the Year for the work you did during our big fire. Yes, yes, you were.
Yeah, a lot of other people helped too.
You were a saint in that.
Well, thank you.
And I had a time in my life, and there are only a couple of people here who know this story, where I was critically ill, and I was in ICU, and I should never have survived that health crisis. And at one point in time, Darlene said to me, people are praying for you, Tammy. Our church is praying for you. And when I came out of ICU and recovered and was coherent again, because I was in and out of consciousness, we talked about that. And that was the one thing that I did know. There were a few glimpses in that week of being incoherent and not conscious that I would hear people's voices when they came to see me. But the one thing I knew was that God was there and that people were praying. And I don't know how I knew that. And, we talked in our group about the body being gone. And really, in that time and that week, my physical being meant nothing to me. I mean, except the pain I was in that I was aware of on occasion. But the spirit, I was definitely aware of and definitely felt that presence and that. And so listening to the story, and Mary not recognizing Jesus at the beginning until he called her name, and then she knew who I was. And I know that feeling, that it's not the words, it's the feeling, it's the presence, it's the spirit.
I'm doing my traveling, and I like to go to cultures that are really so distant from my own. And so I was in northern Thailand, hiking up into the Burma border. It was quite an adventure by myself. And I was coming into this village, my destination, and I took a tumble, and I broke bones. And I didn't know the language, I didn't know anything, and the story goes for 5 days before I got help and drug on blankets up into the wilderness, and there's pain, right? There's a lot of pain, physical pain, and somehow that pain should have been there, but it wasn't. When I took the tumble, as soon as I came to a stop, my first thought was a question. It was, what now, God? Seriously, what now, God? And I during the whole time, I mean, when they was being drugged up the mountains, I didn't know what they were doing. I couldn't understand their language. Maybe they thought I was useless, so they wanted to dig a hole, right? I mean, in the hole, that was it, and my family would never know, and all these things that we go through my head. But I never lost faith. I knew God was there. I wasn't alone. But it was because of, I think, my faith. And we were marching together through that 5 days before I actually had surgery. So
it's a very emotional story, isn't it? Actually, to be standing, staring at the place of death, and not just loss, but the worst loss ever, and to see something that has clearly become something else. And it's too much to take in, about seeing destruction of everything I cared about, and then to see it completely gone, and to see it turn into something I couldn't really grasp or imagine. And then she begins to believe, and she goes and she announces it to them. She doesn't just weep at them, I think I've seen the Lord. She announces to the disciples. Wow.
These windows each a silent song, compose an ageless story. When first the daylight breaks within, with scattered wings of glory, the voice of prayer, the notes of praise, the steps that faithful feet have traced, the sanctuary of God's grace, a place where Christ is found. To pause, reflect, and dare to love, to learn to trust the holy, to witness to the power of faith, become ourselves yet slowly, resist the forces that divide, the gated places open wide, to seek and feel on every side, the place where Christ is found. We should claim this as our own, mistake, defend, protected. May Jesus point us to the way, renew and resurrected. The power that rolls away the stone, and then heals the wounds of flesh and bones. It is uncontained and can't be owned, yet here the Christ is found. Let all we know of love's expanse, of tender hearts unfolding, bring into oneness all the earth, its mystic joy beholding. For God whose nudging brought us near, along a path we may not steer, has just begun, not ended here, the place where Christ is found. God's just begun, not ended here, the place where Christ is found.
So what have we been doing? We've been talking about moments where we've been forgotten, even rejected, even by our own congregation. But deeper than that, times where we've been deeply aware of God's presence, where we know we're loved. Moments when unbidden a word surfaces. Forgiveness. We've been remembering moments of critical times in our lives when we're lost or ill or have tumbled. We worry, is someone just going to throw me in a hole and forget about me? Moments of knowing presence. And somehow in that great mystery of transformation, there's no pain. There's only presence. We've been allowing the story to work in us and around us, and inviting that great mystery that's embedded in those words. And maybe even here today, we might be able to proclaim, this is the place where Christ is found, alive.
I have decided to follow Jesus. I have decided to follow Jesus. I have decided to follow Jesus. No turning back, no turning back.
Just because this is the end of the video, it doesn't mean it's the end of your time with the story. Keep talking about it for as long as you need to. Take some time to be aware of your own feelings and memories of those times when, in the middle of pain and heartache, you felt the presence of God. After the end of that StoryFest, the one that you just saw the video of, I had to go for a long walk to remember and reflect on those times when I've been in deep grief or pain or anger, and it was through my own tears that I felt the presence of God in my soul speaking my name. Before you go, a reminder to check the Woodlake Productions website, which you see here lighting up my chest. If you'd like a free copy of my story about Mary of Magdala, the one that the Reader's Theatre people told you, or of Donald's poem, all you have to do is download them. And while you're on the Woodlake website, you might want to enrich your StoryFest experience by ordering this book here called The Gift of Story. It's a fun read. I had great fun writing it, and it's written so us ordinary mortals can understand and enjoy it. By the way, if you're interested in the song that Linnea sang, The Place Where Christ is Found, wasn't it beautiful? Anyway, you just go to her website where you'll find that song and the whole collection of poetically and musically rich resources. And finally, here's what I hope you'll take away from this. The darkest hour is just before the dawn. If you are in grief or pain, allow the tears to happen, because through those tears, like Mary Magdala and thousands of others, through those tears you may become aware of the presence of the risen Christ.
Your story makes a home within our soul. Your story makes a home